Hi, welcome to this presentation on what's new in IBM Spectrum Protect version 8.1.8 and IBM Spectrum Protect Plus version 10.1.4. I'll be going over the technical updates for Spectrum Protect, and that includes the list of items here on this chart. And then I'll turn it over to my colleague Sean Sperry to go through the Spectrum Protect Plus items. Both of these GA on June 27th, 2019. Okay, the first new feature in Spectrum Protect is tier to tape. Now, the need for a tiering solution is being able to take data that is sitting on more expensive disk storage pools. And as that data ages, the recovery operations usually require that it's really not on as fast or high performing of media. And so we'd like to be able to move that off to less expensive types of media with the understanding that the likelihood of a recovery request is going to diminish greatly. So it's not as critical that it'll take longer to recover either from tape or a off-premise cloud container. So back in version 8.1.5 of Spectrum Protect, we introduced the ability to tier from directory container to cloud based upon the age of the data. In 8.1.6, we introduced the ability to tier node and file space data from a directory container to a cloud by both the age and the state, for instance, either active or inactive data. And in this version, we're adding to that the ability to tier directory container data out to a tape as well. Now, when we tier that data from a disk directory out to tape, we will uncompress and rehydrate that data before writing it to tape. We do have considerations that you should take into account before you set up tiering rules, and I do have that link here. In fact, I've got the chart in this deck as well, so I'll show that to you. But make sure you check that out before you set up those tiering rules. So we have three basic types of rules, and those are tier by age. So we're going to tier the data if it's in days or older. Then we have tier by state, which will tier inactive objects that are a specific number of days old. And then we have no tiering, which says this client's data should not be tiered. And you can put these rules together in a combination of a parent rule, which defines the main storage rule for a source pool. And then underneath that, you can have multiple subrules, which are optional, but which will override what's defined in the main rule and be very specific for the individual nodes. Now, when we tier to tape, we do have to think about a secondary copy. If that original directory container pool was replicated to another server, then the second copy that's on that target server exists and it remains a viable restore point. If that original directory container was only protected with a tape copy, which is you make with protect storage pool type equals local, then you'll want to run a backup storage pool on the data once it is tiered out to the tape pool. There is a YouTube on how to set up tier to tape, so do check out that YouTube out there. Okay, let's go ahead and dig into some details here. So first of all, when you're planning to tier out to tape, you need to understand the cost, the capacity, and the speeds of either the cloud storage you're tiering to or the tape storage that you want to involve. And this is really critical when we start thinking about if you have to do a recovery, a disaster recovery from either tape or cloud, will it meet your service level agreements? And so we do have documentation out there, and it will cover things like the impact on recovery times between a local disk storage and tape or cloud, as well as really emphasizing the fact that due to the longer recovery times, tape or cloud storage might not be best practices for operational recovery. Maybe it's good enough for disaster recovery, but you definitely want to look at that. Next, you'll want to identify the client types that exist within a source storage pool. Do you have virtual machines that are being protected? Do you have databases? Do you have different type of file system data being backed up? And once you've identified those client types, you'll want to set up the tiering rules for those clients that exist inside of that big storage pool. So you'll want to have your parent rule and then the subrules underneath that. We do recommend that you start out small, so start with a few clients and then increase as you get more comfortable with the performance and the requirements for tiering. Remember, once you've moved this data out to either cloud or out to tape, we can't untier it. We can't move it back into a directory container pool. Now you can implement this plan either by using the Operations Center or by command line, and I'll show you both of those. Obviously, Operations Center is a little more intuitive, and we'll walk you through the different wizards. Now, if your source pool does contain a diverse set of clients, then some of the things you'll want to look at is having one parent rule defined, and then subrules for each group of clients underneath those that need different tier settings. Now, the subrules are also the means to choose a different target pool. So inside of a parent rule, you can have maybe some of the clients going out to cloud and some of them going out to tape. You can mix and match. And we're going to check that each of the clients is only a member of either the parent rule or one subrule. We can't have any overlapping there. Now, a client could have its data processed by different storage tiering rules if that client had data in different source pools that were assigned to different storage tiering rules. Modifying or deleting a rule or subrule does not move the data that's already been tiered out there. So once again, once you've tiered it, we cannot untier it. So this chart is available directly from the Operations Center, or you can go out to the link here. But this will just help you make some good decisions on tape tiering. So in order to do tier to tape, you can choose the tape storage pool for the tiering target pool while you're going through the Operations Center setup. So the tape target pool choice is available for the parent rule and or the subrules. And once again, you can have different target pools for your parent rule and then for the clients inside of the subrules. So for an existing configuration, you can modify those rules and update them to be to utilize a tape pool. However, you can only update the subrules of an existing rule. So for a new configuration, then you can go ahead and choose your source here, and you'll see it underneath the Operations Center storage tiering rules. And now you'll see underneath the target pools that you do indeed have tape as one of your selections if you have a tape defined in your environment. You can also create an empty subrule now, and the reason for that is if you wanted to create a tier to tape, but you wanted to move some of the clients that were currently tiering to cloud, create an empty tier to tape subrule, and then once that's been created, go back and update it by removing those clients from the tier to cloud subrule and putting them into the tier to tape subrule. Future data will follow the new tiering rule, but data that's already been tiered will not be moved. Another thing you'll notice is we have some new status information for the last runtime of the rules and subrules. So if you go into the Operations Center storage tiering rules, you'll see a new column called status. Now, if this is a down level client, then you will get unsupported as the status. That just means that the status field is unsupported, not that the client is necessarily unsupported. If you hover above this particular status, it will expand and give you the rule or subrule. And the reason we did this is that there's one process for each source pool and target pool pair. So that's two processes right there. And then for each rule or each subrule, you're going to have additional processes. So for instance, if you had two source pools and two subrules plus the source and target pool pair, that would end up with 6 processes. And so this summary here just makes it easy to expand and see if it was canceled or if there was a problem, which of the subrules actually failed or had problems. On the Spectrum Protect Operations Center tiering page, you will now see in the bottom right-hand corner a new tiering rules status, and this will give you a good overview of, and you can click on this and it'll take you directly to the page we just saw, so you can determine why something failed or what's happening out there. If you have a Spectrum Protect server that's at version 8.1.8, but the spokes are at a lower level, that's when you'll see this unsupported showing up in the status field. Likewise, you might not have, for instance, the Run Now button enabled because that does require your version 8.1.8. So if you had a down level server, that would not be enabled. When we do the tier to tape, all of the legacy storage pool configurations actually are preserved. So when it comes to things like creating copies of your Spectrum Protect storage pool, running reclamation on the tape storage pool, all of those are in place once the data hits the tape storage pool. Tier to tape can share tapes with the legacy backups or with the S3 archive to tape by Spectrum Protect Plus, but most likely you'll want to have tier to tape have its own set of tapes. Once data is tiered to tape, if it hadn't been replicated while it was in the disk storage container, then you should go ahead and run a backup storage pool against that tape pool. If you run the query process command, you will see the tiering summaries as well as the worker threads that are out there doing the tiering. So that's an example right here of a query proc. We do have a new Run Now button. This Run Now button will immediately run a storage rule and its sub-rules. And so this is great if you need to, for instance, recover from error conditions or you want to try out a new rule. And if a rule does have multiple source pools, you can select a subset of them to be run now. And so to get to that, go into the Operations Center, Storage, Tiering Rules, and then click Run Now. What's actually happening behind the covers with this Run Now is a start storage rule, which is a new type of command inside of Spectrum Protect. And at this point, start storage rule just works with your tiering rules. But if you do want to kick off a rule immediately, this is what you would use to run that. And this is what's being used behind the covers inside of that Operations Center Run Now. Okay, so what I just talked about was Spectrum Protect now supports tiering to tape as well as tiering to cloud. And once the data is tiered to tape, it will be uncompressed and undeduped. And then you can use the normal tape functions against it, things like creating a copy storage pool or reclaiming space on those tapes. All of that is supported. In addition, the clients can restore directly from that tape pool if they need to restore data back to their machines. Okay, let's switch topics and talk about AWS S3 Intelligent Tiering. If you're a Spectrum Protect customer who is utilizing AWS cloud containers, so what you would be doing is maybe either backing up your data to this off-premise AWS cloud or tiering out to this AWS cloud, Spectrum Protect is now able to take advantage of a function inside of AWS called S3 Intelligent Tiering. So the reason AWS offers this S3 Intelligent Tiering is to provide customers optimization of their storage costs that automatically will move the data between their standard AWS cloud class and their infrequent access class. So if you have not access the data that's originally put into a standard AWS class, and that's where Spectrum Protect will originally write the data, then it'll be moved automatically by Amazon out to the infrequent access class. Now, the infrequent access class is cheaper to store data in, but it does cost you more if you have to access that data a lot. In order to turn on AWS S3 Intelligent Tiering, you do have to set that up directly inside of AWS, and you do get charged a monthly fee to utilize this tiering inside of AWS. However, you can save money if you are infrequently accessing and reading that data. You should go out and read the Amazon rules around the charges on AWS, and I did put a link there to that. So once you've turned on AWS S3 Intelligent Tiering inside of Amazon, then you will go to Spectrum Protect And inside of your OC storage pools, when you are creating a off-premise cloud, you now have the ability to choose this intelligent tiering as where you want to place the data instead of just the normal S3 standard place. From that point on, then Spectrum Protect will allow AWS to tier that data as AWS sees fit. Now, if you were to turn off intelligent tiering, we are not going to move the data back around. It'll stay wherever it was at, but there won't be any other impact. It'll just stay wherever it was last sitting. Any type of data that Spectrum Protect writes out to AWS is candidate for this AWS S3 Intelligent Tearing if you do turn it on. So that would include your backups, your archives, your databases, your data that came from Spectrum Protect Plus. All of that is candidate. There is a YouTube out there if you want to learn more about this and if you want to see me walking through the setup of that AWS S3 Intelligent Tiering. Next, we have some more enhancements to our client web GUI. The first piece is easy download of all available problem determination information for a Spectrum Protect client. In order to do that, you do have to turn on the ability to do this download. And so the system admin will have to enable that. And this is the VE profile tsmvm GUI frconfig.props file. And they have to set enable_download_logs needs to be set to true. Once that's set to true, the end user can go out here and click on the upper right-hand corner and do the download system logs. The download system log will start the process in the background, and it'll take anywhere from 1 to 5 minutes. It'll pop up a dialog box if it's a Firefox interface you're using, whereas Chrome will simply show an icon in the bottom row that it's doing the download. Now, once the download's complete, you'll save that download and it'll be saved as a zip file, and then you can send the zip file off to IBM support or whomever needs to look at those logs. Remember, this is collecting the client-side information. We do have another gathering tool called ServerMon for the Spectrum Protect server. The files that we do collect for the client, I've listed those out here, so you can see all of that will be included in that zip file. Another new feature in the web GUI is a restore to alternate location option. So if you click on the options button in the restore list panel, you can choose to restore to a different location. One option is to manually enter a valid path, and to add a subdirectory to the selected alternative location, you have to manually update the input field and then click restore. Or you can click on the browse button to open the new select alternative restore location dialog and use Directory Explorer to look at the file system and drives and directories. Then you can choose a directory in which to do the restore field from. For the client web GUI, this is a list of the supported platforms for Windows and Linux machines, as well as which browsers we support. The next feature I'm going to talk about is Spectrum Protect for VE for your VMware support for multiple Spectrum Protect servers. Previously, only one Spectrum Protect server was able to be seen per installed GUI host on your vCenter plugin. And now with 8.1.8 and above, we allow VMware vCenter users to use the backup, restore, and reporting functionalities in the plugin across multiple Spectrum Protect backup servers. In addition, you'll see that we have simplified installation where we use a single GUI host to support multiple backup servers. We have increased plugin capabilities that allows for adding in additional backup servers. Everything is now data center centric, and we will still keep the legacy web GUI as it is. So even if you added multiple Spectrum Protect servers to the vCenter plugin, the legacy web GUI will just show the original Spectrum Protect server, which is designated as the default backup server. I do have a YouTube that shows installing all of this, so you can take a look at that YouTube. Here are the steps that you're going to go through for this multi-server configuration. You're going to use the configuration mode in the legacy wizard from the post-install prompt. And that's only needed on a new install, not on an upgrade. And then from that button in the configuration wizard, you're going to launch the vSphere web page and log into the vCenter. Once you're in the vCenter, you're going to go into IBM Spectrum Protect, configure connections. And that's where we start with the new steps, where we can actually go to the configure backup servers, add a new backup server, and then we'll go in and we'll add data center associations and data movers. And then we'll look at the schedules, and finally we can add in Mount Proxies. So let's go through some of those new steps. I won't go through the original installation piece. In the new step, the first thing you're going to do from the vCenter is go ahead and add a backup server, and that's going to be from the backup server tab, and you'll simply click on the Add Server button, which will bring up this following wizard here. Now the panels have the same options as the legacy wizard, so it'll look very familiar. You do have to have the SSL configured with the Spectrum Protect server as well as with the REST API. So you will see a couple prompts coming up to accept those SSL certificates. So you'll want to enter your backup server address, your Spectrum Protect server admin port, and then a Spectrum Protect server admin and password. Next, you'll have to go in to add in a backup server prefix and domain. You can take the default, but you definitely want something that makes sense so that it's easy to coordinate the nodes underneath that Spectrum Protect server when you're looking at the vCenter and at the Spectrum Protect backups. When it comes to the data center management, unlike the legacy wizard, the plugin has the user go through some distinct steps. And so adding a data center to the backup server is going to allow that server to start backing up the data center. And you will see a new tab that's present that allows you to view and modify the data center associations, as well as a list of the data centers that the vCenter knows about. And here's that Create Association button. So go ahead and select one of those data centers. As you can see here, we selected Vancouver, and then you'll click on Create Association. At that point, you'll choose a Spectrum Protect server from the list, and you'll need the server admin ID and password, as well as the data center node name. And that node name will be generated automatically. You can modify it if you don't like the generated node name. Okay, after you've clicked add, it will come up with information about what your next steps are going to be. And in this case, it's going to be add in a data mover. One thing to notice is that all of this data center information is being stored in the backup server config.xml, and there'll be basically a stanza for each of the Spectrum Protect servers that you're adding into that. And inside of this backup server config.xml data center, some of the fields will include the data center name, the data center node, and the data center object ID. If you do manually remove a data center, it will cause it to no longer show up in the plugin or a legacy as an associated data center. Okay, so next you're going to add a data mover. And so in the data movers field, if we click on add a data mover, it's going to have you select the data center, and then the data mover name, the data mover host name, the vCenter user, and the vCenter password. In order to add a Mount Proxy using the plugin Add Data Mover, the name must end with the following. You have to have remote_mp_win if it's a Mount Proxy on Windows, and remote_mp_lnx for a Mount Proxy on Linux. And finally, this wizard will create some schedules out there, but these default schedules will be empty. There won't be any clients or objects associated with those. So you would need to go in and add in some tagging so that specific virtual machines and all were being backed up underneath these schedules. Okay, so what I just covered is some new wizards that help add in multiple Spectrum Protect servers into one vCenter GUI so that you can monitor and look at them and understand what's going on across multiple Spectrum Protect servers. Okay, and next new feature is Spectrum Protect for VE is our Hyper-V full parallelism. So this is now on our Hyper-V side. And previously only our VMware backups had this parallelism on it. But now in 8.1.8, we also offer that for Hyper-V, and that's going to be virtual machine parallelism, virtual disk parallelism, and mega block parallelism. Now, each virtual machine can have multiple sessions assigned, And the factors include the amount of virtual disk, the size of the virtual disk, the remaining data of backup, the sessions that are associated, and the assignment of those sessions. Now, all of these assignments of those sessions are going to basically be opaque to the users. VM max parallel is going to define the max number of virtual machines in parallel, and VM backup sessions, if that's not set, the maximum number of sessions is the default of VM max parallel. And you will have one session per virtual machine, and when the remaining number of virtual machines is below VM max parallel, then you can assign additional sessions to the remaining virtual machines. Okay, shifting gears a little bit, let's talk about Spectrum Protect Plus. On June 28th, 2019, we will have a new offering inside of AWS Cloud. And this marketplace offering is going to allow you to deploy vSnap storage into your AWS virtual private cloud. And what this provides you is the ability with an on-premise Spectrum Protect Plus machine to protect the databases that are running inside of AWS. And those include DB2, Microsoft SQL, Microsoft Exchange, Oracle, and MongoDB. Now you can deploy into either an existing AWS VPC, and in that case, AWS will actually define the vSnap storage out to Spectrum Protect Plus, and that does have to be a Spectrum Protect Plus 10.131 server. If you don't already have a VPC set up, then you can go through the steps to create the VPC, and once your virtual private network is established, then you would just manually do the definition inside of Spectrum Protect Plus of that vSnap storage. So this gives you a great way to utilize Spectrum Protect Plus to back up both your on-premise data as well as any of the databases that are in your AWS cloud. You can also use the AWS storage to replicate your backups from. So if you had some on-premise backups in a vSnap, you could replicate those over to the AWS vSnap. Once you've purchased this vSnap storage inside of AWS and it has been installed on your Spectrum Protect Plus server, at that point, you can upgrade your Spectrum Protect Plus server to other levels or do any other type of modifications you would want. I do have 2 videos out there showing how to order and how to define the storage inside of AWS, so do take a look at that. One is for an existing VPC and one is if you have to create a new VPC. Okay, let's move on to the last topic here, and this is going to be your S3 archive to Spectrum Protect tape. Spectrum Protect Plus is able to offload its backups to Spectrum Protect to provide long-term storage. Now, back in version 8.1.7, Spectrum Protect Plus could offload incremental backups to Spectrum Protect directory or cloud container pools. In this version, we're now allowing Spectrum Protect Plus to archive full backups to Spectrum Protect tape or VTL pools. Now, back in version 8.1.7, we introduced the idea of Spectrum Protect acting as an object agent with an object client being Spectrum Protect Plus, and that Spectrum Protect Plus object client could send data to Spectrum Protect via S3 and store it in an object storage space. When it comes to doing a restore, Spectrum Protect Plus is able to manage these restores, and it actually is able to access those offloads or archives from inside of Spectrum Protect and do a test restore against that data. Now, in the case of a archive to tape, we will actually stage that data back into a cold data cache on side of Spectrum Protect, and then the Spectrum Protect Plus can do things like utilize the instantly mountable copies and do its tests or its restores. We support these types of offloads and archives for all Spectrum Protect Plus workloads, so whether those are virtual machine backups or database backups or catalog backups. There is no tiering or migrating between a object container pool that was used to do a Spectrum Protect Plus incremental offload and between a object tape pool which contains the Spectrum Protect Plus archive full backups. When we archive off to tape from Spectrum Protect Plus, we're sending that full image, and we're actually using tar to send it over to Spectrum Protect via S3. And we initially put that archive into a cold data cache, which is a new type of disk storage pool inside of Spectrum Protect. And then that cold data cache will migrate the data out to tape. Once it's on tape, you can do the normal tape reclamation and co-location and all those other typical Spectrum Protect tape features. Node replication or Protect storage pool is not supported for objects that are written out to tape. However, you could use the backup storage pool inside of Spectrum Protect if you wanted an additional copy of that data. If you do run a replication on a tape pool with S3 objects in it, we'll simply skip those S3 objects. You cannot delete a tape or an associated cold data cache until all the data has expired or has been deleted off of those tapes and cold data cache. When we're doing all of these writes from the object client Spectrum Protect Plus to the object agent Spectrum Protect, we are using the S3 Glacier protocol. However, right now that's being limited to just Spectrum Protect Plus and Spectrum Protect. Other products that utilize S3 currently cannot write to Spectrum Protect using that protocol. Now, all recovery points for the offloaded backups are available directly from Spectrum Protect Plus. When we stage the restores back to cold data cache, then there is a setting inside of Spectrum Protect Plus called Archive Restore Days, which dictates how long those files should stay in the cold data cache. By default, that's 3 days. So for 3 days, the Spectrum Protect Plus could do instantly mountable restores from the cold data cache. So let's take a look at how this is. When we're doing the backup, the S3 client, which is Spectrum Protect Plus, is going to do put objects using the Glacier protocol to IBM Spectrum Protect, which is acting as the object agent. We will write that data initially out to a cold data cache, and then we'll migrate that out to tape from there. Now this cache will flush about every 5 minutes. The cold data cache is based upon a sequential file volumes. When it comes to restore, the S3 client, which in this case is Spectrum Protect Plus, does a post object using the Glacier S3 protocol to Spectrum Protect server, which is acting as the object agent. And we will use the Spectrum Protect server will request the data be copied back from the tape out to the cold data cache. And then from there, the Spectrum Protect Plus S3 client can access the data. When you're looking at sizing the cold data cache, the first thing to note is that MIG process is going to scale the number of drives that's used in the tape pool when we do the migration from the cold data cache out to tape. And you want to ensure that the cold data cache pool is going to be large enough to hold your daily volume of offloaded data from Spectrum Protect. So you need to consider the sizing for your cold data cache. The first thing to take into consideration is the MIG process is what's going to determine the number of drives that are used when we migrate the data from the cold data cache out to the tape or VTL pool. You do want to ensure that the cold data cache is large enough to hold both your daily volume of offloaded data from Spectrum Protect Plus, as well as any restores you're doing back into Spectrum Protect Plus. If it's too small, then those archives will fail and you'll have to retry that offload. You do want to configure the disk subsystem for random reads and writes. Don't use sequential reads and writes for the cold data cache. And for optimal throughput, set the max number of mount points on the node to at least 100. Now by default, the max scratch for that cold data cache is going to be set to 5,000, which will allow up to about 50 terabytes of data in the cold data cache. You can use update storage pool if you need to add additional space, or update dev class to control the volume capacity if you hit the max scratch limit. You can also use the tsm diskperf.pl tool, which is part of our blueprints, if you want to ensure that the cold data cache configuration is valid and has the speeds and feeds needed. And you will need to carve out the cold data cache directories prior to defining them. Now, if you have to remove restore objects from the cold data cache prior to when they would normally expire off, there's a couple things to think about. First of all, the restored objects are kept in the cold data cache for the amount of time set out by the Spectrum Protect Plus's archive restore days. And by default, that's 3 days. Now, those can be removed earlier than that if the following things are met. First of all, if your CDC capacity exceeds the Spectrum Protect server option of cold data cache remove copy early capacity trigger, which by default is 75%. Secondly, you have to have remove restore data copy before lifetime ends set to yes, and that's done via a define or update on your storage pool. And you have to have your cold data cache remove copy early day threshold server option set, and that has to be met. By default, that's going to be 4. And so the objects that have been read by an S3 client have to have been over 4 days old if you took the default, or the objects that were copied back have to be over 4 days ago and not have been read by an S3 client since then. So if all 3 of those were met, then it would delete the data from your cold data cache that had been staged there for restores. Okay, in order to add in the archive to Spectrum Protect tape, you first have to do the setup inside of Spectrum Protect. Now, you can either do this with the Operations Center or via command lines. So let's take a look at the easy way first, which would be your Operations Center. You're first of all going to create an object agent on that Spectrum Protect server. And remember, this works for Windows or Linux objects that onboard, or if you have an AIX server, you can do it off-board. You can have 1 object agent per Spectrum Protect server. In this presentation, I'm not going to show you how to do that setup. I did cover it in the last version, and there is a YouTube out there as well. So after your object agent is set up, you'll need to create your tape storage pool and your cold data cache. So go into Operations Center, Storage, Storage Pools, plus Storage Pool. Now you do need to predefine the disk space for your cold data cache, and you do need to have your tape or VTL set up prior to running through this Operations Center. Next, you're going to create an object client after you have your tape set up, and that will be done through the wizard and the OC clients. Hit the plus client and then hit the object client. Your policy domain, you're going to notice, now has 2 options, a standard and a cold. And you can choose to either have one or both of these when you set up your policies. And we'll talk about that here in a second. Once you've done all your setup on Spectrum Protect, you're then going to go out to Spectrum Protect Plus and do some additional setup there. And we'll walk you through that as well. I do have a couple videos on this that show both the setup inside of Spectrum Protect as well as the setup required inside of Spectrum Protect Plus in order to get the S3 archive to Spectrum Protect tape to work. So I'm going to start with step 2 here and show you both how to do that in the Operations Center as well as in command line. I will not be covering step 1. So from the Operations Center, in order to define your cold data cache, you're first of all going to go into Operations Center, Storage, Storage Pools, plus Storage Pools. You're going to click on a tape object client. And when you click Next, that'll take you to this screen where you're going to be prompted for a cold data cache. And here you can enter 1 or more directories that will be utilized as your cold data cache. Once you click Next on that, you're then going to assign a tape pool, and it will go out and it'll allow you to select from existing tape or VTL pools that are out there. And at that point, your storage pool and your cold data cache will be set up. The next step is going to be your object domain policy. So you're going to go to Operations Center, Clients, Clients, and then Plus Client. You want to define an object client, so you'll click on this. And the first thing it's going to prompt you for is a policy domain. And it's going to ask you for a name of that, and then it's going to ask you for a standard and a cold destination. This is a new concept. You can now choose to have data that is going to be offloaded incrementally to your standard destination, or you can choose to archive via like an S3 Glacier protocol full data backups to a cold destination. For your policy domain, you can have both of these or just one of these. It does not matter. Once you've created this policy domain, you'll then be asked to choose a client to associate with that. And finally, that client will be set up and it'll give you important information like your access key ID, your secret access key ID, and so forth, as well as a certificate. And it's this information that you're going to need to copy over for Spectrum Protect Plus when you do your setup there. Okay, so I just walked you through the Operations Center. If you wanted to do command lines, we definitely have those out there as well. So you're first of all going to have an object agent set up, a tape or VTL storage pool set up, and directories available to accommodate your cold data cache. You can then run this define storage pool command with the storage type cold data cache. So in version 8.1.8, we're introducing this new storage type of cold data cache. Now, some of the restrictions on this is that non-object clients cannot ingest into a cold data cache pool, but they can into a tape or VTL pool. Also, for a cold data cache or a tape VTL that's specified as a next storage pool, you can do backup or restores to both pools, but you cannot do any replication of that cold data cache. If you try and replicate the tape that has object storage in it, we will simply skip those S3 objects. Also, for the tape, move volume, move data, and convert storage pool are not allowed for those S3 objects. Once you've defined your cold data cache, if you're using command lines, then you'll have to define an object domain policy. And this is where we have to do the standard and the cold pool. The object domain policy is emulating an AWS S3-ish storage tiers, where you can choose to have data be offloaded into a standard or into cold. However, we do not tier between standard and cold pools on Spectrum Protect for the Spectrum Protect Plus offloaded data. So here's the two commands you'd run to define the object domain as well as to register the object client. Okay, so inside of Spectrum Protect, you've set up the Spectrum Protect server with an object agent, you've set up object storage, and you've defined an object client. You're now going to take that object client information over to Spectrum Protect Plus in order to have Spectrum Protect and Spectrum Protect Plus link up. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to my colleague to tell you all about Spectrum Protect Plus version 10.1.4.
Hello, my name is Sean Sperry, and I am now going to talk about the new features and some of the differences in Spectrum Protect Plus version 10.1.4. Now, as Tricia mentioned, we have quite a few new features in 10.1.4. They include changes to the way or additions to the way we archive data, or we have the ability to archive data from Spectrum Protect Plus. Some additions and new features in database/application support. Quite a few new interface changes, including language support, improved usability, demo configurations, error messages, and some security enhancements and currency that we are going to cover in this video. So let's go ahead and get started. For those of you who've used Spectrum Protect Plus version 10.1.3, you'll remember we introduced Offload from the Spectrum Protect Plus server. And offload is a term that Spectrum Protect Plus uses for long-term retention of data. So basically it takes a copy of the data from the vSnap repository and moves it to either Spectrum Protect or one of the object storage or some object storage in one of the cloud providers, AWS, COS, or Azure. Beginning in version 10.1.4, we've now added the additional ability to do archives to both Spectrum Protect Plus tape and AWS COS and Azure cold storage, including AWS Glacier. Now, this functionality is going to be very similar to offload in that you can take a copy of the data that's stored in vSnap and move it to a S3 repository. And that workflow is going to be basically independent of the data retention workflow to vSnap, and also independent of the and the offload and the archive are going to be independent of each other. So you can do one or both, etc. Now, just to make sure we understand what this functionality is, today in version 10.1.4 we do not support tiering of the vSnap data. So basically what this is going to be is making a copy of vSnap for long-term retention purposes to an S3 destination. Now, we have here a table that discusses some of the differences between offload to S3 and archive to tape and Glacier. First of all, you see that the data format, that for offload, the data sets are going to be offloaded at the block level using a block device gateway driver. And for archive, we're going to use native format that is archived at the file level using direct upload. For offload, we're going to do incremental forever. So basically the first offload will be a full, and each offload after that will be an incremental. Whereas with archive, all data in each recovery point is going to be uploaded in full. So there's no incremental transfer at version 10.1.4. Offload data compression is going to be retained, and in archive, data is going to be uncompressed and compressed again before it is uploaded using a tar file. For recovery locations, in both cases, you'll be able to recover via the original vSnap or any alternate vSnap in your architecture. But the recovery mechanism is going to be just a little different. And this is because of the times that it might take to get to the data. For offload to S3, we're going to have an instant mount from the cloud. So the volume is going to be mounted on vSnap and made available to the client, and blocks are going to be fetched on demand. But with an archive, because it might take a lot longer, the data will be staged on vSnap. That is, they'll be downloaded back to vSnap and then made available to the clients. One of the nice features about archive with regard to that is with offload, you do require Spectrum Protect Plus and vSnap for the restore, but with the archive, you have the ability to restore the files directly without SPP or vSnap. Now the setup and configuration of this is very similar to offload. Now a little earlier you heard Tricia, my colleague, discuss the setup on the Spectrum Protect side. So we're not going to go into that in a lot of detail. What we're going to look at here is the setup on the Spectrum Protect Plus side. And from a Spectrum Protect Plus perspective, you're going to set up either a cloud destination or a repository server. A repository server currently is going to be Spectrum Protect, and here you see an example of the setup in Spectrum Protect Plus for a Spectrum Protect server. Basically, you're getting it a name, host name, port, an access key, and or a certificate. Now note the Spectrum Protect repository server must be at version 8.1.8 to allow for archive, because that is the first version that we're supporting archive in. For the cloud providers, again, you're just going to pick a cloud provider and you're going to give it the provider name, the name of the destination, pick a region, and then give it the credentials and the buckets that you are going to use to archive the data. Now, just a note here in 10.1.4, we currently do not support lifecycle policies on the bucket. So when you set up your AWS side of the system, you cannot enable lifecycle policies on that. Once you set up either the repository server or the cloud provider, you're next just going to go into the policy or the SLA and define the times that you want to do the archive. And as you can see here, basically you have the cloud, which is the offload, and the archive, which is going to be the archive from Spectrum Protect Plus. And you are just picking a frequency, a start time, and a retention, and a source for the archive. Now again, because this is not an incremental transfer, you'll be able to pick a frequency is going to be limited to weeks and months. So you won't be able to pick do a daily archive because of just the time it would take to do the full movement of data. And all the backups to the archive tier will be base backups. Okay, so that's archive support for Spectrum Protect Plus. Now we'll move on to DB2 and some of the changes we're going to have in the DB2 support. We introduced DB2 support in Spectrum, DB2 application support in Spectrum Protect Plus a couple versions back. And one of the things that we did not support was Linux on the Power platform, and specifically Power Little Endian. And beginning in version 10.1.4, we are now going to support running Red Hat Enterprise or SLES on Power Little Endian with DB2 backups. The rest of the support has not changed. Basically, it's the same versions of DB2 Enterprise and the same versions of AIX and Linux 64-bit on x86. Now, the other enhancement we've had at 10.1.4 with DB2 is support for multi-partitioned databases. When we introduced support for DB2, we did not support multi-partitioned databases, but beginning in version 10.1.4, we do support that. Now, as you can see down in the screenshot at the bottom of the screen, basically, if your DB2 database is partitioned, you'll go in and register the instances where the partition is contained, but the partition instances are going to be displayed as a single unit with a breakdown of the related hosts, including the partition information. So you see there we have a hosts and partition numbers, and we have a name of a particular database. Aside from that, you'll be able to go in and just apply an SLA policy to a partition database, just like you would a database that's stored on a single host, and do the backups according to the schedule and the retention that is in the SLA. Now, there is a couple of prerequisites that I do want to just give you a heads up about. First of all, with partitioned DB2 data, you will have to use this DB2 _parallel_ACS environment variable or registry variable, or depending on what version of DB2 you're using, you may have to set this DB2 underscore workload variable. These are variables that basically support the ACS mode, backup mode that we are using to back up DB2. Some newer versions of DB2 will give you will allow you to use this DB2 underscore parallel under ACS. Older versions may require you set this DB2 underscore workload variable. Now again, as with all the requirements, including the last PowerPoint I just talked about, it's always a good idea to go out there and Google the Spectrum Protect Plus All Requirements document to make sure that you have the details and you are supported in the exact configuration that you are using DB2 in, and that you set up all the other requirements in the operating system, such as sudo privileges, etc. And those registry variables are documented there as well. Now, there is a couple special mentions about log backup for DB2 partitioned databases. When you have a Spectrum Protect Plus, of course, allows you to do archive log backups with DB2. But if you have a partitioned database, what Spectrum Protect Plus is going to do is go out and update the database, either the logarc meth1 or logarc meth2, with the vsnap repository as the destination for the archive log backups. And what we're going to be doing is using a single log archive volume on the vsnap, since the log paths are orthogonal to the node element of each of the partitions in each of the log paths. But since we are only using a single vsnap volume, we are going to require that all of the partitions have unique settings for logarc meth and logarc meth1 and logarc meth2. So if that isn't the case, what you're going to find is when you go to configure the SLA and do the discovery, the DB2 instance and or database will be marked with a not available for backup symbol. So you'll have to go in and change that. Okay, moving on to Oracle multi-thread support. Oracle 12c introduced the concept of a multi-threaded database instead of a multi-process database. And this requires Oracle credentials for doing the backup processing. So what we've done in version 10.1.4 is we now support the backup and restore of multi-threading databases. And we've added a new lightweight discovery process to identify if a multi-threading process is enabled and to ask the user for credentials after you do the discovery. The credentials are collected at the time of registration, and Spectrum Protect Plus is going to pass those credentials to the Oracle agent during backup. And the Oracle is going to use the credentials to log into the database in order to actually do the backup. Here you see an example of what this looks like in the Managed Application Server for Oracle. If you're familiar with MongoDB that we introduced on the last 10.1.3 release, this looks very similar to that, right? You now have a Get Database Bases button, and for each of the particular databases, you can go in and set the credentials appropriately for doing the backup. Log backups, just like any of the other applications and databases, are going to run as independent cron jobs outside of the regular backup job schedule. So in order to log into the multi-threaded database during backup, the agent is going to create that cron job and push the database credentials down locally to the application server, and it's going to be used by the agent whenever it's needed during the log backup. They are stored in the application server in the path that is described on the screen, and they're going to be encrypted using AES 128 with a randomly generated host per key. Now, if the credentials change on the SPP side, the updated credentials are going to be pushed down the next time a backup jobs runs on the application server. So that pretty much works just like the rest of the log backups for the databases work. Restore works the same way as the restore of regular databases. However, there is one exception. The databases are always going to be stored in a non-multi-threaded mode. So Oracle is going to store the sysdba credentials in a separate password file outside of the database. And on restore, depending on the new name or new instance selected during restore, the password file may not be available. So basically, we can't rely on the password file being pleasant. So it's going to always restore in this multi-threaded mode. After the restore is complete, you can then go in and manually configure the new credentials and switch the database to multi-threading mode using a SQL statement. Okay, so moving on to our next application, it is MongoDB. And the first change I'd like to tell you about is now, just as we have with DB2, we've also added support for Linux on PowerLE to the MongoDB support. So as you can see from the bottom there, that includes Red Hat Enterprise Linux 6.8, CentOS 6.8, Red Hat Enterprise Linux 7, and CentOS 7. Now I do want to point out that, as you can see, the versions of Mongo that we support have not changed, 3.6 and 4.0, but for the PowerLE versions, we are going to support the MongoDB Enterprise Edition only. Again, same admonition as far as checking for supported platforms. Before you implement, go out there and Google the support matrix for Spectrum Protect Plus, the all requirements document, and make sure that your version is listed, and check the prerequisites for setting everything up in terms of Linux, what you need in terms of permissions, and the exact versions that are supported. Now, if you recall back there, back when we introduced support for Mongo at 10.1.4, we did not support restoring specific databases or collections using the MongoDB when you were protecting MongoDB with Spectrum Protect Plus. And beginning in version 10.1.4, you can now restore specific MongoDB databases or collections by using a granular restore operation. And the way this is going to work is you're first going to run a test restore job, and then you're going to run the appropriate MongoDB commands to get the database back. Basically, those commands are going to be Mongo dump and Mongo restore commands. You can use those commands to get back the individual databases or collections from the recovery source. I put a quick reference. This is a clip from the documentation for individual database restore, so you can just kind of see the commands here. I won't read these steps to you, but this is kind of what makes sense if you're used to using Spectrum Protect Plus. Basically, you're going to log on to the MongoDB restore server on which your test job is directed, and then you'll run the MongoDB system command to find the temporary recovery MongoDB instance location, and then finally run the Mongo dump command to create the dump file of specific database and
and collection and run the mongo restore command to dump the file into any MongoDB instance. Finally, when you're done doing that, you're just going to cancel the active restore as you would any other test restore in Spectrum Protect Plus. Okay, moving on to the new GUI changes in Spectrum Protect Plus version 10.1.4. We now have a new restore wizard. Now, for the vast majority of things that we're going to go through as we step through this restore wizard, you can already do in version 10.1.3 just by picking the restore options and picking the snapshot that you wanted to restore. But what we've tried to do in version 10.1.4 is to make this simpler by grouping things together in a wizard, so that basically you can go in and know exactly what you needed to pick, and it would guide you rather than you having to do this freeform. Now, the restore wizard now applies to all types of our data sources for Spectrum Protect Plus, including VMware Hyper-V and all the applications we support, including DB2, Exchange, MongoDB, Oracle, and SQL. So you'll see at the top, if you start with the restore wizard, you'll just pick the hypervisor or application that you're going to restore. And then you'll select a source. So basically you're just going to see the instances that you have available over here. You click the plus sign to move the instance over to the right side. One of the things I do want to point out here is there is this skip optional steps checkbox that you can select here. So if you don't want to go through any of the optional steps such as job options, etc., you can click on that and not have to click through all of the panels of the wizard. The next thing you're going to do is you're going to pick the restore snapshot. And basically you're going to be able to pick on demand or scheduled. You'll pick a site and you'll pick the site from which you're going to restore. And then you'll see a list of snapshots that are available on that particular site to restore. You're also able to pick here archives or offloads, and the same would apply to the list of snapshots that are available there to restore. Setting the destination pretty much works just as it did in the previous version, except here you're doing it in a dialog box. Setting the data store, again, pretty much same as the previous version, except now you're doing it in a dialog box. There are particular features that are available to particular different types of data. This is a VMware restore, so we're able to pick the IP addresses so that we can override the existing IP addresses for a restore. That's a feature that is available in VMware only. This is one of the changes from the previous version of the product. When we used to do a test restore, we would pick the name of the item that you were restoring for you. So for instance, if you were restoring this WB-Win2K-CDM and doing a test restore, it would just append a random number to it here. Now you can go in and actually name the version of the item that you see in the hypervisor or the application. And that's very useful because it gives you some control over it if you want to do scripting or something along those lines. These are just the same old job options that you had before, such as overwrite and power on. And here we see the summary of the restore that you can go in and review. And then finally, you'll go ahead and click submit. Now, once you click submit, we now have a new jobs and operations panel that you can go monitor the restores on. And just want to spend a little time going over this. It tells you the type of job, and the jobs are listed here on the left-hand side. In order to see the job log, you click the job and you will see the job log here on the right-hand side, and you can get further information about the job and what is occurring during the job. Just as before, you can download the zip. But one of the things I do want to point out is sometimes in my experience using this, the screen can get a little crowded. So if you click this little left-hand button here, it will make the log fill up the whole screen, and you'll be able to see more information on the line in one panel. When you're done, you can just click the opposite direction and it will move back. We've added the ability to do log filtering now, so you can go ahead and click this little filter button and you will be able to filter the job log on info, detail, error, summary, or warning. So that's just a nice little feature to be able to drill down straight to the errors. We've also added on the jobs and operations panel a active resources tab. And again, this is useful for having all in one place the active resources if you've done any test operations that you can go ahead and see what's out there. So here you see it's broken up into applications and hypervisors, and you can see we have one test restore going on in VMware, and then you have the exact same actions that you had in the previous version that you could do. So you can either clean up the restore, move it to production, or clone it. But again, here, all grouped in one place, so you don't have to go hunting around to find the type of item that you're trying to do the operation on. Okay, some additional changes. Spectrum Protect Plus, for those of you who have used it, is delivered as an appliance, as you probably know. And for ease of doing a trial or a test, we have a onboard 100 gigabyte vSnap repository that is delivered with the virtual machine, either Hyper-V or VMware. Now, with that 100 gig onboard vSnap repository, as you might imagine, 100 gig is not really a tremendous amount of room to do data protection with. And also from a performance perspective, in many cases, if you're setting up a Spectrum Protect Plus environment in a production environment, having just the onboard virtualized vSnap might not give you the production performance that you need. So really, this vSnap setup is designed for you to do easy functional testing and not size or performance. In terms of size and performance and planning a production configuration, we always encourage people to go out and review the Spectrum Protect Plus blueprints. If you just Google Spectrum Protect Plus blueprints, you will find a spreadsheet and a PDF that describes the various different configurations that you can set up in terms of dedupe and how the vSnap is configured, and also sizing tools to help you size your vSnap. So that's what I would encourage if you're going to do this in a production when you're designing the architecture. But what we've seen is a lot of people are kind of taking that 100 gig onboard vSnap and putting it into production and then having issues with performance and or size. So in order to make it clear what this is used for, we're changing the way that 100 gigabyte onboard vSnap repository is delivered. By default, you're going to get a site called demo, and you're also going to get a new SLA policy called demo. And what's going to happen is that 100 gig onboard vSnap repository is going to be configured to use the site demo, but with that SLA policy, you're not going to be able to change its site. You are going to be able to add systems and change the frequency, however, but offload and replication are not going to be supported with that site and vSnap. You will still get your normal gold, silver, and bronze SLAs, but they will not be allowed to be assigned to the demo site. They will be assigned to a site called primary by default, and that's what you'll use. So that's how the product will be delivered out of the box, the OVA or the Hyper-V download. Now, if you want to remove these demo features and you don't want them, what you can do is just delete the demo SLA policy, remove the localhost vSnap that resides on that demo site, go ahead and run the maintenance policy, delete the demo site, and then re-add the localhost vSnap with the properly designed architecture and with the credentials that you want to use. Okay, moving on to changes. In version 10.1.4, you're going to now be asked, we have a lot of users that are using Spectrum Protect or users that are using Spectrum Protect Plus, and some new users. So what we've done is we've introduced a quick start guide that's integrated into the online help. So now when you first start the product, that will pop up and it will help you get a quick start in terms of learning how to use the product. We of course have online help integrated into the product, and you can just click question mark to launch the online help from the interface. And then finally, we've always had logs associated with Spectrum Protect Plus jobs, but now all of the log methods are going to contain specific message IDs. And those are documented in the Knowledge Center with specific actions or in the product with specific actions. And again here, the desire is to allow the ability to search on a specific log ID or message ID so that you can find information about what that's supposed to mean, or perhaps what other people have done when they encountered that message. Here is just some details on the different message numbers and what they're associated with. I won't read the chart to you. You can read it yourself if you're interested in determining that. But as you can see, they're just broken out into component to help identify where a message comes from. That's just a quick screenshot of the what's new information in the user interface. We now have people that are upgrading from version to version, and so we want to provide them some information about what's new when they upgrade so that they can understand the differences between the previous version of the product and the current version of the product. And that will pop up in the GUI immediately after you upgrade. Another request that we've had is we're IBM, obviously, International Business Machines, so we have a lot of customers that are not necessarily English speaking, or perhaps English is not their first language, and they want to use the product in their native language or see the documentation in their native language. So what we've done is, beginning at version 10.1.4, we've gone in and introduced global languages, the list that you see on the screen in front of you. Now, the way this is going to work is it's going to use the language that your client browser requests. And if it's one of those languages, the UI or GUI will be displayed in that language. If not, then the UI will revert back to English. And similarly, if the Knowledge Center documentation has a language that is local to your site, you can go to the lower right and pick that language. And if that content is available in that language, it will be displayed. And if not, it will revert back to English. Here you see an example of the Spectrum Protect Plus dashboard, I guess is what it is, and that looks like Chinese to me, but I could be wrong about that. Okay, global preferences. We've now introduced a global preferences framework that allows you to centralize control of global preferences. A lot of these settings were there, but they were hard to set in previous versions of Spectrum Protect Plus. You might have to go to the Spectrum Protect Plus server and edit a properties file. And now we've externalized at least some of those global preferences so that you can go in and make changes to them. A few that I want to specifically point out to you is we now support doing a VMware inventory task during backup. So the inventory jobs typically run once per day, but you might want to run a real-time inventory before you do a backup just to make sure you have the latest updates. And you can now click that checkbox and have that occur so that you know you have the latest inventory before you do a backup. We've included some new RBAC role-based access control granularity features. There's a new database resource group in the role-based access control called database all resource groups. And basically what that lets you do is, if there's a group of people that you want to give access to a set of databases, it's like all SQL database instances, it just makes that a lot easier to do, and you don't have to go out there and create that resource group. A couple miscellaneous security enhancements. A lot of people with Spectrum Protect Plus are using Active Directory or LDAP, but there are some people that are using the built-in user definitions. And for those people, we've added this security enhancement that lets you set the minimum password length for Spectrum Protect Plus. The default is 8, but you can obviously increase that. Now again, if you're supplying your usernames from Active Directory or from LDAP, that is what's going to control the minimum password length and the changes to it, etc. We've also changed or forced a change in the GUI admin on the first login. In previous versions of Spectrum Protect Plus, when you first logged on, you created a GUI admin called admin, and you had to assign it a new password, but you were allowed to leave that username there. And now when you first log on to the Spectrum Protect Plus GUI, we're going to require you to change that GUI admin to some other name, new username, and that new username can't be root admin or test. So again, that's just a security for not having a security enhancement for not having a well-known system administrator. Just a note on OS and hypervisor currency. We have added support for additional hypervisors and operating systems in Spectrum Protect Plus 10.1.4, including Microsoft 2019 or Windows Server 2019 and latest versions of CentOS, Red Hat, and SUSE. Now, again, I know I've said it before, but I'll say it again. Always Google the Spectrum Protect Plus All Requirements document and look at the specific operating systems that are supported before you just go ahead and try and implement them. Okay, so that covers the latest features of Spectrum Protect 10.1.4 and the latest version of Spectrum Protect version 8.1.8. I hope you found this information useful, and I look forward to seeing you on a future video.